When people think of elite Vietnam units, they think of Navy SEALs, they think of Green Berets, they think of the men who wore patches and trained at Fort Bragg and Coronado. They don't think of the men in this story, because these men didn't wear patches, they didn't wear rank. Some of them weren't even American. They were over 4,000 strong, scattered across 44 provinces. They were funded by the CIA, paid in cash, and armed with whatever worked. Swedish submachine guns, captured AK-47s, Browning 9mm pistols bought through cutouts in Saigon. They moved at night, in black pajamas or enemy uniforms, hunting men by name. The South Vietnamese called them Tam Sat Ting. The Americans called them the PRUs, Provincial Reconnaissance Units. The Viet Cong called them the worst thing that ever happened to their war. This is the deadliest Vietnam War unit you have never heard of. February 17, 1968. 2 weeks after the Tet Offensive cracked Saigon open, a Navy lieutenant junior grade named Frank Boyce moved through the rice paddies of Ba Xuyen Province in the Mekong Delta. Boyce was a SEAL, Detachment Alpha, 8th Platoon. He was not leading other SEALs. He was leading 60 Vietnamese commandos through a village the Viet Cong owned outright. By dawn, 23 VC cadre were in zip ties. 20 more were dead. 1 PRU striker was killed in the assault, 1 American, 60 locals, 43 enemy neutralized in a single night. This was not unusual. This was Tuesday. To understand what Boyce was doing in that paddy, you have to go back to 1964, to an office in the CIA's Saigon station. The station chief was a former Army officer named Pierre de Silva. De Silva had a problem. The conventional war, the war of strategic bombers and battalion-sized sweeps, was killing peasants and missing the enemy. Because the enemy he wanted wasn't in the jungle. The enemy was in the village. It was a man called the VCI, the Viet Cong infrastructure, the shadow government, tax collectors, recruiters, propaganda chiefs, assassins. The communists called it the revolutionary infrastructure, and by U.S. military estimates, it numbered somewhere between 65,000 and 80,000 men. Between 1965 and 1972, the VC and its enforcers assassinated more than 33,000 South Vietnamese village officials and kidnapped tens of thousands more. In 1956 alone, before most Americans had even heard of Vietnam, they killed over 450 local officials. The war wasn't being lost in the highlands. It was being lost at the rice mill, at the well, at the dinner table. De Silva wanted to fight that war. So he built what he called counter-terror teams, small, local, vicious. By April of 1965, the program supported around 140 teams, 3 to 12 men each. They claimed a kill ratio above 8 to 1. In 1966, embarrassed by the word terror, the CIA renamed them Provincial Reconnaissance Units, PRUs. Same men, same mission, cleaner letterhead. The PRUs were not Americans. They were Vietnamese, mostly, but not the Vietnamese you saw in newsreels. They were former Viet Cong who had defected under the Chiu Hoi program, men who knew the cadre lists by heart because they had once been on them. They were ex-ARVN Rangers, ex-South Vietnamese Special Forces, Cao Dai religious irregulars from Tay Ninh, Nungs, ethnic Chinese mountain fighters, Cambodians, Montagnards from the Central Highlands. According to journalist Douglas Valentine, the roles also included ex-convicts and mercenaries. What they had in common was this: they were recruited locally. They worked the province they grew up in. They knew the VC district chief because they had gone to school with him. They knew the tax collector because he had married their cousin. You cannot interrogate that knowledge out of a prisoner. You have to grow it. The CIA paid them accordingly. A PRU striker pulled in roughly 15,000 piastres a month. An ARVN private earned 4,000. There were bounties for specific targets, $42 for a captured VC lieutenant, scaling up to $11,000 for a senior VCI cadre brought in alive. By 1971, those bounty figures were being printed in the New York Times. A standard PRU team, after standardization in late 1967, was 18 men, 3 squads of 6, 1 team per district. Province-level units ran anywhere from 30 to 300 men. In garrison, they wore civilian clothes. In the field, tiger stripe camouflage or black pajamas. In Viet Cong-controlled areas, Sometimes they wore captured NVA uniforms, so that any VC they encountered first would mistake them for friends. The Americans embedded with them wore the same. No rank, no name tape, no insignia. If they died on an operation, officially, they had not been there. The American advisor pool was a roll call of the most dangerous men in Vietnam. CIA paramilitary officers, Navy SEALs from Team 1 and Team 2 working out of Detachment Bravo, Green Berets from 5th Special Forces Group, Marines, including 1st Force Reconnaissance, a handful of Australians from the Australian Army Training Team Vietnam, the most decorated Australian unit of the war, 4 Victoria Crosses among them. One of these advisors was a Marine captain named Andrew Finlayson. Finlayson was a 1966 Naval Academy graduate, a former 1st Force Recon team leader with the call sign Killer Kane. In 1969, he was reassigned from a rifle company in the Arizona Territory to advise the Tay Ninh PRU. Tay Ninh sat in 3 Corps, in the shadow of Nguy Ba Den, the Black Virgin Mountain, just a few miles from the Cambodian border. It was Cao Dai country. It was also the heart of the Viet Cong's Central Office for South Vietnam, COSVN, the enemy's Southern Military Command. Finlayson took over 92 men, 5 teams of 18. His Vietnamese commander, a man known to him only as Mr. Chin, ran an intelligence network built almost entirely on family ties. By Finlayson's own count, about 2/3 of every VCI cadre his unit captured or killed was identified by that network. Not by satellites, not by signals intercepts, by an uncle who had heard something at a wedding. The PRUs did not do search and destroy. Search and destroy was the conventional model. Lift a company by helicopter, sweep through a hamlet, count the bodies. In Operation Speedy Express, the 9th Infantry Division claimed 10,889 enemy killed in 5 months. They recovered 748 weapons. The Army Inspector General would later conclude that somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 of those bodies were civilians. The PRUs did the opposite. They took 6 men, sometimes 12, into a village at 3 in the morning. They went to one house. They took 1 man. If the man fought, they killed him. If he came quietly, they walked him out to a waiting Honda motorcycle, motorcycles bought by the CIA at Saigon dealerships, and drove him to a provincial interrogation center. William Colby, the CIA officer who would run the program at its peak, put it this way: the VCI was, quote, of more value to us alive than dead. But in contested districts, the PRUs operated on what one advisor called shoot first rules. If you were on the list and you reached for a weapon, the conversation ended. By 1970, the PRUs were achieving roughly 380 VCI neutralizations per 1,000 operators. The math is brutal. Just over 4,000 men were dismantling at industrial scale the political nervous system of the Viet Cong. In 1967, the program got a new name, ICEX, Intelligence Coordination and Exploitation, was created by MACV Directive 381-41 on July 9, 1967. The South Vietnamese called the broader effort Phum Hoang, after a mythical phoenix-like bird. The Americans translated it Phoenix. Phoenix swept the PRUs, the National Police, the Special Branch, and Vietnamese military intelligence into a single targeting machine. District by district, province by province, every suspected VCI cadre got a file, 3 sources of evidence, and a place on a blacklist. Between 1968 and 1972, Phoenix officially neutralized 81,740 suspected VCI. 26,369 of them were killed. Seymour Hersh, citing South Vietnamese figures, put the killed number closer to 41,000. Now, and this is the part that gets lost, only about 14% of those killed were killed by PRUs. The rest died in conventional military operations, artillery, airstrikes, infantry contacts. Between January 1970 and March 1971, 94% of those killed under Phoenix died during regular military operations. The PRUs were the scalpel. The rest of the war was the hammer. You can argue about American body counts forever. The honest test is what the other side said. Trung Nhu Tang was the Viet Cong's Minister of Justice. After the war, in his memoir, he wrote that in Hao Gia Province, west of Saigon, the front infrastructure had been, quote, virtually eliminated. Phoenix, he wrote, was dangerously effective. Colonel Bui Tin, a senior North Vietnamese officer who took the surrender of South Vietnam in April 1975, told historian Stanley Carnow that Phoenix was, quote, a devious and cruel operation that cost the loss of thousands of our cadres. Nguyen Co Tak, who would later become Foreign Minister of Unified Vietnam, was more specific. In some provinces, he said, 95% of the communist cadre had been assassinated or compromised by the Phoenix operation. Madame Nguyen Thi Dinh, Deputy Supreme Commander of the National Liberation Front, summed it up in one sentence. We never feared a division of troops, she said, but the infiltration of a couple of guys into our ranks created tremendous difficulties for us. Colby himself heard the verdict years later. From 1960 to 1975, he was told, the toughest period the communists faced was the 4 years from 1968 to 1972, the Phoenix years, the PRU years. But there is another verdict, and it came from Americans. In 1971, a former military intelligence officer named K. Barton Osborne sat in front of a congressional subcommittee and called Phoenix, quote, a sterile, depersonalized murder program. He described electric shock interrogations the men nicknamed the Bell Telephone Hour. He described, in clinical detail, a 6-inch wooden dowel driven through a prisoner's ear into his brain. Some of Osborne's testimony has been challenged. He served in I Corps in 1967 and 68 before Phoenix was formally implemented, and his most extreme claims have been called inconsistent. But the broader pattern of abuse at provincial interrogation centers is well documented. Quotas made it worse. The program set a target of roughly 1,800 neutralizations a month. When officers were judged on body count is what they produced. Rivals denounced rivals. Wives denounced husbands. Province chiefs took bribes to release real VC and held innocent men to make their numbers. Roughly 30% of those targeted ended up dead. Colby spent the rest of his life defending the program. To call it a program of murder, he said, is nonsense. He pointed to written orders forbidding assassinations. Critics pointed to graves. The honest answer is that both things are true. Phoenix did what it was built to do. It also did things its architects swore it would not. By 1972, the VCI in many provinces was a hollow shell. Senior cadre had fled to sanctuaries in Cambodia. The shadow government was running scared of its own villages. Phoenix officially ended in December 1972. The PRUs were folded into the South Vietnamese National Police in 1973. Some kept operating until the tanks rolled into Saigon on April 30, 1975. And then the bill came due. After the fall, the new regime hunted PRU veterans by name. They had the rolls. They had the photographs. They had men, former cadre, who remembered exactly who had come for them in the dark. Vietnamese PRU strikers were sent to re-education camps where, by Senator Jim Webb's reading of the congressional record, 56,000 prisoners died. Some estimates put the broader number of deaths in those camps as high as 165,000. There is one American name in that ledger. Tucker Gugelman was a retired Marine, a Guadalcanal veteran, a CIA paramilitary officer credited with helping originate the counter-terror concept that became the PRUs. He had retired to Bangkok in 1972. In April of 1975, with Saigon falling, he flew back in to get his Vietnamese family out. He missed the last evacuation. He was captured. He was taken to Chi Hoa Prison. 11 months later, in 1976, he was dead. According to a U.S. forensic examination of his returned remains, virtually every bone in his body had been expertly and brutally broken. He is the only American known to have died in a Saigon prison after the fall. The CIA carved the 78th star into the memorial wall at Langley for him. The man who helped build the unit that hunted the VCI died at the hands of the VCI that survived him. Today, the PRUs are studied, quietly. A 2009 Rand Corporation study called them, quote, arguably the most effective action arm against the Viet Cong shadow government. It noted, carefully, that the model has relevance for contemporary counterinsurgency. The targeting cycle the Special Operations community now calls F3EA, find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, is, in its bones, the Phoenix cycle. It has been used in El Salvador. It has been used in Iraq. It has been used in Afghanistan. Every time a small team of operators kicks in a door at 3 in the morning to take a specific man off a specific list, somewhere in the lineage of that operation is a CIA officer in 1964, sitting in a Saigon office, deciding that the war was not in the jungle. The war was in the village. The PRUs were the answer to that question. The answer worked. And the answer cost something no one has ever fully tallied. Over 4,000 Vietnamese commandos, a few hundred American advisors, one unit almost entirely forgotten that did more damage to the Viet Cong than the divisions whose names we still remember. That is the strange arithmetic of a secret war. The men who win it are the men nobody is allowed to know about.